Okay, how's everyone doing tonight? Glad to see your faces. Glad you made it. Um, this is such an important topic, and I'm so glad that you took time to be with us and listen in to what Jennifer is going to share with us. So let me introduce our presenter. This is Jennifer Cardine. Am I saying your name right, Jennifer?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. Jennifer is a licensed mental health counselor, and she specializes in adoption trauma and family related issues. She works in a group practice called Nourish Your Mind, and she's also a trust based relational intervention practitioner. And I think she'll speak to why she's in this work, but I think she shared partially it's because she is an adoptive parent herself. So, welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you.
If you all could just do me a favor and put your full name in the chat if it doesn't show up in your little box, just so that I can take attendance. And I also want to introduce those of you who are adoptive or guardianship families who are not yet a part of our Agape program, which is putting this training on. Um, it's a free supportive service for adoptive and guardianship families. We work in 19 counties in New York. And if you would like information about this program, I'm going to put my email in the chat. Please feel free to reach out. And I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer.
Thanks. Hi, thanks for having me. Thanks for joining me this evening. I'm hoping to make this like an interactive conversation because I really want to, try to answer questions as I go and make it as like useful and practical as possible. So I do come into the field, I come into the conversation as an adoptive mom myself. I have I forgot how many. I have four biological kids and one who we adopted through foster care. So we're going to talk about the grief that adoptive kids have experienced and also the grief that adoptive parents experience. I'm guessing that the idea that kids that go through adoption are grieving and have had some significant losses is probably a pretty familiar concept to a lot of you. I don't think I can see everybody, but if it is something that you feel like have you gone through any type of training, or has this been a conversation for you in any of your education? I can see, I think 3 of you, I don't know how many people are here. Would you say like yes, or is it okay, something that you have, a lot of times in our like MAPS training, or when we're first setting out to become foster and adoptive parents, we talk a lot about just that trauma of separation for, oh, I got the thumbs up, nice. Just the trauma of separation from a biological parent. Even if a child is leaving a home that is, abusive or dangerous or whatever, it's still a huge loss for them to leave that and then to come into a home that's even safer or as we would think of as maybe better for them. And so that's training that I think a lot of people do have experience with, but we'll go into it more. So I also want to talk about the experience, like the grief that adoptive and foster parents and guardians tend to experience as well. So some of that I notice in my work is that sometimes that comes from some people go into adoption because of maybe fertility issues or other losses related to that. But I think a lot of people who go into adoption tend to have experienced other significant losses in their lives. A lot of times it's people with this loss that they've experienced, and so they want to kind of be there for somebody else to help alleviate or help them walk through a loss and a grief, so they don't have to carry it. Kind of be there for someone else, maybe the way someone wasn't there for you. I think a lot of us kind of come with that. It's important, very important, I find, especially in my work with all parents, is that we deal with our own like traumas and losses so that we're able to be present for our kids, because we really can't, I'm sure you've heard the term, we can't fill from an empty cup, right? Or we can't, yeah, that's right, we can't pour from an empty cup. If we're kind of still processing all of our losses and disappointments, it's hard to be there for someone else who also is. So what I love about supporting parents is that I think when I support parents, I'm supporting kids too. So we're going to just move on. So what is grief? Grief is just how we process loss, right? So everybody has experienced some type of loss in their life. Sometimes we think of grief as just specific to death, but really it's just how our bodies and brains process any type of loss. So a loss could be a relationship, an expectation, plans, and of course, death. So I want you to just kind of consider what like what losses maybe you've experienced, what kinds of things maybe did contribute, what losses might have contributed to you entering into foster care or adoption. So, you know, the pandemic is, in addition to foster care and adoption and guardianship, the pandemic is something we can all relate to, something we've all experienced, and everybody has experienced really significant loss over the last couple of years. We really have gone through this like collective trauma together, and it's affected different people in different ways, obviously. And this slide I really like because it kind of just talks about a lot of the different losses that we've experienced. Some people may have lost family members, may have lost jobs, you know, stability, predictability, like all of these things that really help us to feel grounded and safe, you know, we have lost. Oh, I can't see what slide I'm on. Okay. So I'm really big on talking about feelings, and that's going to be a big part of just our conversation. I believe that we have to kind of identify the feelings that we have associated with our loss in order to move on. I think that a lot of times those of us who are caregivers tend to be really good at like hiding our feelings, pushing them down, tucking them away, just to like get the job done, just to like do what we have to do, especially if we're stressed and we're overworked. And on top of that, dealing with all this pandemic, you know, the pandemic losses. So when we do that, when we do shove our feelings down, we don't notice them, we don't identify them, it leads to the feelings come out in one way or another. So it will come out as maybe anxiety or depression, physical pain, even difficulty sleeping, those kinds of things. I often think of our, you know, dealing with our feelings is almost like, you know, if you have like a 2-year-old who wants something and you're on the phone and they're not going to leave you alone. They're going to keep, you know, doing whatever they have to do to get your attention until finally you give them your attention. So our feelings are like that. If we don't kind of respond to them, and when they come one way, they're going to show up in another more intense way. Okay. So I don't know if any of you have taken like a psychology course or maybe been familiar with like these 5 stages of grief, which is how we used to look at grief. It was kind of this like nice, neat little presentation where you experience a significant loss and then you feel anger, denial, bargaining, where you're kind of like back and forth trying to figure out how can you make sense of it, maybe depression, and then acceptance. So kind of this idea that we like flow through something and then we end up at this nice little ending spot of acceptance. And unfortunately, it's just not that simple. We, you know, who know what does acceptance even mean, right? Like some losses are so significant that they're going to pop up later. You know, we may feel like we're at peace with something, and then, you know, that grief could pop up down the road, like at a wedding or at a funeral, at a birth, you know, at a significant life event. So here are just some symptoms of grief. And these could, you know, I feel like these are things that we all could probably relate to at different times, you know, in relation to the things that we've gone through personally, the things that we've witnessed for other people. I'm wondering if any of you have seen these things in yourself or particularly in any of your kids. Or do any of these things kind of connect with anybody? I don't know if I can see. I can't. I'm just checking if anyone's. I see one thumbs up. Does anybody want to share anything? Like, are there any specific symptoms here that you would notice in any of your kids? Okay. So, you know, I would I could notice like a lot of these things people experience. And I think that sometimes some of them might be hard to know if our kids are feeling them, right? But, I think sleep,
Jennifer, sorry to interrupt. I
yeah,
just want to make sure that you can see the chat.
I cannot.
Okay. Well, I can read, some people responded via the chat. So I
Oh,
just,
perfect.
yeah. So when you asked if anyone has noticed any of the symptoms in their kids, Meg said yes. Donna said definitely. And when you asked which ones, Carrie said all of them. And
Mm,
Cheryl said all of the emotional, for sure.
yeah, right. Okay. Thanks for responding. I can't see everyone, but I'm glad you're with me. Yes, exactly. I think the sleep disturbance is a big one, especially when kids are feeling a lot of anxiety and fear, but a lot of it. So I want to, just kind of talk about, what could, let's talk about like, what are some of the things that our kids could be grieving? I think obviously the most significant one is the loss of their biological family. And that's a loss that spans a lifetime. We can't say like, okay, you've processed that. I'm your, we're your new family now, but those losses can come up in a lot of different times. Like, for example, I have one child who's adopted and I have 4 children who are biological. And we have a pretty big extended family that's close, and everyone else is biologically connected. And my daughter doesn't have that connection, right? So anytime there's a conversation about like, oh, this person looks like that, or, this is your, I'm whatever. We recently found, my daughter has always said, my other daughter, who is my biological daughter, has always said, oh, I know I'm Italian. I know we're Italian, and we're not. And my husband did like a DNA thing and he was like 0.5% Italian, right? So the conversation is about that. Oh, we're, and my other daughter doesn't necessarily understand that at this point. She's 8, but it's a conversation that will come up over time, right? Where and that's a loss. It hurts, to just, we don't know hers, and maybe she'll want to do that DNA test when she's older, but we're not going to do that when she's 8. So it's kind of compounded in so many different things. But I wonder, what kinds of things do you notice in your kids? What are some things that they have lost?
Renee said loss of culture, language, of origin, genetic history, extended family, like bio siblings, grandparents, uncles, aunts.
Yeah, right. It's so heavy. I think it's heavy for those of you, and myself included, who were raised by biological parents. It's hard, I think, for us to always remember what a significant loss that is, that my daughter doesn't have anyone in the family who looks like her, although I think she kind of looks like me, but she doesn't have to belong, oh wait, I missed something. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about how kids communicate their feelings. So kids are communicating how they feel through their behavior, right? So kids don't always, and many adults don't, to be honest, have the language to communicate their feelings, right? Like a child's not going to say, I'm feeling afraid there's not going to be enough food to eat tonight. So is it okay if I grab a couple candy bars or granola bars from the cabinet and keep them under my bed, right? They're just not. You're just going to find the wrappers under the bed and kind of wonder, why is there food hidden all over my house, So kids are communicating their needs through their behavior. And so I always want to remind parents, let's look at what's the need behind the behavior. There's always something going on there. If there's a bad behavior, there's some kind of need behind it that just needs to be met. And that sounds simple. And I know that you could probably give me 100 examples of how it's way more complicated than that. And that just takes time to kind of dig through and figure out, what does that really mean? But kids express their needs through their behavior. Let me just make sure I'm not forgetting anything. So one reason for this is sometimes kids experience a loss and trauma before they're verbal. So they may have experienced a significant loss before they themselves have the language to speak, to say like, I miss my mom, or I miss the smell of my old house, right? And so they're not able they can't even put that into language, but like their bodies and their memories are able to recall that, so it's a loss that they've had, whether or not they have the words for it. And so when kids experience this big significant trauma of being pulled from their biological family to an adoptive family, it's a loss that they may not even have the words for, and they just know something doesn't feel right, something feels off. So as an adoptive parent, it's really our job to just play detective, and it's hard. It's our job to kind of try to figure out, like, can we try to figure out what is going on with this kid, and why is this behavior coming out? A lot of times grieving behavior won't always make sense, right? Like, grief doesn't just mean we're crying all the time. Grief might mean we're like punching a hole in the wall for no good reason, what seems like no good reason. So I want to talk a little bit about some ways that we can practically like respond to a child who's grieving, who's processing a big loss. So, one is kind of looking through the lens of compassion. So we want to look at, what is a compassionate stance on this child? How can we look at, when we're looking at the behavior that's infuriating or frustrating, can we zoom out and see the bigger picture and see all the stuff that this kid has carried to this moment and try to be a little bit more compassionate? So as I mentioned, we want to try to find the need behind the behavior. So the example of like hiding the food, maybe they need to have some kind of food that's always available to them, that they're always allowed to take. Like, we have a bowl of fruit. You can always have a piece of fruit. That's fine if you're feeling hungry. We always want to try to balance this idea of nurture and structure. So nurture is kindness, patience, endurance. It's like that sweet, loving, just, I love you no matter what, and I'm here for you, and I'm on your side, and I have all this forgiveness. And then structure is more of a sense of routine and expectations, and giving, letting the child know like what's coming and what they, that there are certain standards maybe, right? So we give nurture so that our kids can heal, and we give the structure so that they can grow. This is where I'm hoping some people will want to interact. So I'm wondering, some of these things sound really nice in theory, but then if we try to pull them into like our real life, it can get kind of like messy and difficult. So I'm wondering if anybody has any questions or examples that they would want to like kind of throw into this part of the conversation.
For me, I feel a part of it is it all goes back to how important it is for us as parents to, because all of us don't come to this with the same kind of insight, into ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So, so often I find myself, especially when I was younger, reacting to my own stuff without realizing that it was my stuff.
Yeah.
And by the time I started to figure out my stuff from their stuff, it was years down the road.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think as important as this is, the compassion part, a lot of us don't do compassion,
Mm-hmm.
As part of our day-to-day interactions with people.
Right.
Some of us do and some of us don't. So, I mean, that's where it just seems incredibly hard.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like you're asking somebody to be something they're not.
Yeah, you're right. That's a good point. Yeah. And I think a lot of times, you're right, that the act of having some insight on what our own experiences were has a huge, tremendous impact on the type of parent that we are. So we tend to copy what our parents did unless we make a lot of effort not to, and we learn new things and we deal with our own stuff. It's just natural, right? Like that's who we learned how to be a parent from. So of course we're going to just copy what we learned and then do that with our kids, so a lot of times I think that taking time to be reflective on like, what did my parents do for me? Did I like that or not? Did that work or not? And how do I want to be the same or different from them? That's hard work. you know, it really is. And I think a lot of times parents, adoptive or biological, don't go into parenting with that, prepared with that, you know, prepared with that type of work, because it's hard, you know. So what do you think, what does it mean to be compassionate? What do you think I mean by that? Chester, you can answer.
Sorry, Jennifer, we had a couple of things in the chat. Do you want me to read them?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, so we have a question from Ebony. What about when the kids are pulled from their parents but are placed with biological family?
Okay. Can I understand the question a little bit more? I'm not sure I understand what the question is.
Ebony, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you were talking about how when children are placed with an adoptive family, but I think she's asking, is it the same kind of grief when a child is placed with biological family?
That would
Ebony,
be
tell me
correct.
if I'm not, okay.
That would be correct.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's a great question, you know, because in that case, maybe they're not losing all of their biological roots and all of their connection to their biological family. But it's still a huge loss. You know, they're still being disconnected from their birth mom or dad or whoever it was that they were with, you know, since they were a baby. It's still, yes, I would say the short answer is absolutely, it's still a loss. It's a loss for a kid to lose and have a disruption from a parent, from one parent, and suddenly be put somewhere else.
Awesome, thanks. And we just have one more comment from Donna, whose house is too loud that she can't unmute, which
I hear that.
I really feel you on that. She said, for me, it's important they know I accept their feelings, but I don't necessarily join them in it. For example, I hate my mom. I'm so mad at her. So instead of saying, you don't hate your mom, I will say, that sounds like a big, hard feeling. It's okay to feel that way.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's wonderful, because it validates the feeling, it validates the experience that they're having, you know, and it doesn't really matter if you hate their mom in that moment, right? It matters more that they're having this gigantic feeling. And so, yeah, so it's important to just let them feel what they feel, for sure. Is anyone else struggling with this idea of what it would be to show compassion to a kid, or does anybody have an example that they could share?
I was just going to say, based on what kind of Chester was talking about, if we don't have an experience of having compassion for ourselves in our own story,
Yeah.
like, I feel like it's really hard to then be able to give it to our kids. So sometimes it starts with even knowing what that feels like for ourselves and our own stories.
Yeah, definitely. Right. I definitely agree. Yeah. So finding that voice, you know, that you would offer to someone who might be really struggling, and your compassion voice is not going to sound like mine, and it doesn't have to, you know, it's just trying to understand what someone else might be going through and meet them where they're at. That's compassion, you know?
Yeah, I was going to say too, for me, I'm much more patient and compassionate when our structure's really well and in place, because when the morning is rushed and lots of things are going on and I'm stressed out, then, you know, my patience is out the window too. So, you know, I like that balance of having structure and nurture, because when we have structure and we're okay and I'm not as stressed about the little day-to-day stuff, then when the behavior escalates, I can take a step back and go, okay, well, what's going on, or why are we doing this? As opposed to like, just put your shoes on, we're late for school, you know, like,
right.
So I'm trying to have that good balance and trying to keep routines in the morning, especially in like getting homework done and all those things. I find the, you know, when I'm tired or I'm stressed, then my compassion goes out the window. So,
right.
And right now in our house, so I have one little adopted boy, and I have a foster group sibling of 5. And right now, mom had unsupervised visits, so she was taking them every weekend, and that has been taken away. And so mom went back to supervised visits. So right now we are having a lot of grief and loss in our house. And my teenagers are tanking a little bit. So that compassion piece of saying like, hey, listen, I know that this is hard, right? Mom's going backwards, and we're, they kind of know where this is headed. And so I think, sitting in their feelings with them is huge, and just letting them feel. But I also, these kids struggle. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to say what's wrong. So some of it's a guessing game, and they've been conditioned to not talk about it for so long that like for me to say, you can talk about your feelings. It's okay. Like, like they're like, nope, it's fine. I'm fine.
Right.
So that's been kind of tricky too.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And we can model that to them, like in littler ways. We can show them, oh, I was so disappointed when, that thing I was excited about got canceled, right? Like we can give them language, because a lot of kids may come to us without any language to express their feelings. And so, to say you can talk about your feelings sends the message like, it's open, I'm open to you, but they may not even know how, right? So we can, that is even part of just responding, is like giving language for specifically how you feel, maybe like if you have dinner together, or if you're in the car, just like naming feelings, like, this is how I felt today. I felt really tired when I woke up, but then I was excited for my day because I had something fun to do, so just like kind of giving language and identifying feelings with specific situations can help kids then to pull that into their conversation, back with us. So I want to, let me see where I'm at here, my little list. Okay. So I want to talk, I think it's important, and maybe I should have started with this, but I didn't, talk about as the parents, our own journeys and what we've been through, and kind of take some time to reflect on how maybe that has impacted, how it has impacted us, whether we have dealt with it, we continue to deal with it, or we have yet to. So most people, come into this field, like I said, I think with some kind of history of loss. My own experience was that we had 3 biological kids, and then we decided to try to have a 4th, and I had a miscarriage, which came as just such a surprise to me. I hadn't had one before, and it really, it was intense, and so I think when we grieve, bargaining looks like, well, you should be grateful for what you do have. However, this really, really hurts. And I think we need to be able, like that compassion is, being able to make space for both, that like, yeah, sure, we are grateful for what we do have, but pain is pain, and that it's worth our time and our energy to work through. And I really wanted to work through that grief. And so part of my working through the loss of that pregnancy was to write a letter to the baby. And in that letter, I had written, a lot of things, but were you my daughter's sister? Because I had 2 boys and a girl. And, that was just part of it. And then my husband and I decided we had always wanted to do a foster care or adoption. And so we went ahead and jumped into foster care. We had kids with us for 6 months who then left. And then our now daughter came through foster care, and we adopted her. So the answer was, she was my daughter's sister, and I think sometimes when we can zoom out and see the picture, like a bigger picture, we can see that it's lovely. Not that life is perfect by any stretch at this point, but we can see, that it's beautiful. But I think that if I hadn't taken the time to really like process that loss of the pregnancy, easily some like resentment and anger and pain could have been transferred onto my my foster and then adopted child. So I think so if we kind of don't process our own losses, it can kind of show up in a lot of different ways. In maybe shame, if something happened to us that brought us a lot of shame or that we don't really want to talk about. Certainly depression or just a low mood, a short temper. Sometimes we want to numb out to our pain by just eating a lot or drinking alcohol, resentment, apathy. And then anger is more like this really comfy, big giant blanket we want to put on over all of those more vulnerable feelings. And it's common. Lots of people get angry and feel anger when things aren't really like going right, or we're not sure what to do. And a lot of times that anger just comes from something that wasn't faced or dealt with in our own history, or even in our own day, right? Like if we have something frustrating happen and we just kind of shove it down and don't honor those feelings and give ourselves that space to feel what we feel, it could then turn into anger, right? Which is why, like that classic example of like someone gets yelled at work by their boss and then they go home and kick the dog, like we aren't processing it in a healthy way. We're just taking it out on someone else. So let's see. So I want to just talk about some healthy ways that we can process our own losses and our own grief. So one is just I love this idea, and I think it's so important, is to notice our feelings with curiosity. So just trying to like understand them rather than just immediately being judgy towards them, right? So many people were raised, myself included, by parents that tend to be dismissive. So just meaning like if you get hurt, fall and get hurt, and your parents like, you're fine, move on, right? So you could be hurt emotionally, physically, you're fine, you're okay, get up, keep moving. And so when we're raised with that message that like my body or my emotions are telling me I'm not okay, but someone's telling me I am, it's easy for us to just be judgmental when we have feelings, right? To kind of look at it like, what's wrong with me? Why am I feeling this? I'm fine. I'm actually totally fine. And so to kind of challenge that tendency, we can notice what we're feeling and look at it with curiosity. So why would I feel that? I wonder where that's coming from. And that is like, that's a gentle response to ourselves. So if I'm frustrated with something one of my kids is doing, I could feel shame about that because it's my job to have all the patience in the world, right? But instead, what I try to do, and I'm not saying I do it all the time, but what I try to do is try to figure out like, what need do I have that might not be being met, right? Like, am I tired? Am I hungry? Do I need a break, right? So trying to respond to ourselves rather than shoving our feelings down with just that curiosity. So we want to talk about our feelings, talk about our experience, talk about what's going on. It needs to be with someone you can trust, somebody that can hear you and validate what you're going through. But kind of getting out those struggles is really important. I'm a big proponent of journaling because there may be things that you're not ready to tell other people and that you don't feel comfortable verbalizing yet, or maybe don't even know how to verbalize. So sometimes just writing it out, sometimes even just doing a page of just words. It doesn't even have to make sense, but just kind of taking whatever's happening on the inside and putting it on the outside. I think when you have the visual and you can see it, it helps to make a little bit more sense and feel a little bit less overwhelming. Exercise is a great way to release stress and heavy feelings. Gives us endorphins that help us feel better and gives us an ability to kind of endure the day-to-day stress that we deal with. Can't really say enough about sleep. Sleep is so important. And I know if your kids aren't sleeping, you're not sleeping. But sleep is how our bodies and our brains repair. So so when we sleep, our bodies repair first, and then our brains repair, right? So if we don't get enough sleep, that's why the next day we're cranky, we're short-tempered, we can't really handle anything because our brains didn't get that restorative experience that it needed. And be patient with yourself. Right. So if you're going through something and you're noticing what's difficult, you're noticing you're struggling, you're noticing maybe you're not responding to people in a way that you feel proud of, there is always a do-over. There's always space to say, you know what, I'm not proud of myself. I don't like how I did that. I'm going to try again next time. I'm going to try to to offer a different type of compassion, a different type of messaging, whatever, and try a different approach. So just giving yourself that space to be where you're at and keep moving forward. We need to lean on our friends and family. So that looks different to different people. We can kind of get into that maybe in a little bit of a discussion. A lot of parents, so in my practice, I see some teens and kids. I also see some adults, but many times when people bring their kids to me, I can recognize that the parents would benefit from help as well, from having that space to kind of process what they're going through. And a healthier parent means a healthier family. So I think a lot of times just having, obviously I'm a therapist, and so I'm a big proponent of therapy, and just having that space to work through what's going on and talk about it. But I'm definitely curious to hear what things maybe have worked for you in terms of, you know, how do you notice your feelings? How do you care for your own emotional experience so that you can be there for your kids? Is that something that anybody would like to respond to? I'm going to see if I can open the chat. Let me see. Oh yeah, I can. Can everyone unmute themselves if they want to? I think so, right? Okay. Let's see. Oh, let's see. Okay. Oh, my pets give me strength. I love that. Pets are the best, right? They just love you no matter what. I have to take breaks, right? It's not negotiable. Exactly. I think it's really important for us to be able to recognize that. I think people can burn out really quickly when they're just trying to kind of handle everything and never take a break for themselves. What are some other ways that you guys care for your emotional wellness? Does anyone want to speak? I might be able to.
I'm Stephanie. Ozzy and I have set some like exercise goals together. Like, we're not huge runners, but we're like, oh, let's like run a 10K, you know, not like a marathon, but like something that we could do. So we've done things like that. And then doing it together makes it helpful.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Then you're like, you're getting the exercise and you're getting a date night. Yeah. Good. Is there anything else anybody wants to share? Any other ideas?
I think support groups play a big role, because you talk about leaning on your friends and family. As adoptive parents, that your friends and family are useless pretty much, because they're not living your parenting experience.
Right.
So definitely finding folks who are living the same experience, and who understand your frustrations.
Right.
You know, and the other piece I think is hopeful. I'm at a stage in my life now where I've come to realize that everything gets easier as time passes, as they get bigger, and as you survive the things that seem unsurvivable in the moment.
Okay. Yeah. Right. So if you can kind of get through that moment,
Stay alive.
Easier. Yeah. Right. Good. Cheryl wrote, when my mother died when I was a senior in high school, I did a lot of what you have on this list. That's great. Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that. And that helps to heal. We're made to heal, right? Our bodies heal. If you get a cut on your hand, it's going to be healed in a couple of weeks. Like we're literally made to suffer, but then heal and be able to endure that. And we can kind of make a choice if we want to choose things that help us to get more well, or if we're gonna not, right? Because you could keep picking at that scab and make it worse and never heal. But our bodies really are made to heal.